On December 1805, Tsar Alexander I looked out at the Pratzen Heights, gave the order to abandon them, and the Battle of the Three Emperors never happened. For weeks, the young Tsar had carried the impatience of a war party that wanted glory, and Napoleon had counted on exactly that hunger. Exactly 1 year earlier, on December 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte had crowned himself Emperor of the French, and he intended the anniversary to be sealed in blood on a Moravian field. The Third Coalition, Britain, Russia, Austria, Sweden, and Naples, had marched to break him, yet by late autumn it was reeling. General Mack had surrendered the Austrian army at Ulm in October. The French had walked into Vienna without a fight in November. Mikhail Kutuzov, conducting a careful fighting retreat from Braunau toward Olmütz, had begged Alexander to wait for the armies still gathering in the east. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The Tsar, against every voice urging attack, deferred to his old general and withdrew his army eastward toward the Carpathians. The trap that Napoleon had so carefully baited closed on empty ground. And what no one at that headquarters could yet see was that this single act of patience would unmake an empire. Napoleon had thinned his own right flank and yielded the Pratzen deliberately, an invitation to a battle that now would not come. When the Allied campfires went cold, he was left holding a victory he could not fight. He did the only thing his temperament allowed. He pursued. The corps of the Grande Armée pressed east after Kutuzov, through Moravia and toward Galicia, hunting an enemy who refused to turn and stand. But the country had already been stripped bare. Kutuzov's retreating columns had taken or burned what the land offered, and the late autumn roads dissolved into mud beneath the weight of artillery and wagons. Marshal Berthier, the chief of staff who held the army's nervous system in his hands, watched the supply trains stretch thinner with every march. The Grande Armée had crossed Germany from the Boulogne camp on speed and momentum, living off the lands it conquered. Now it gained ground only by outrunning its own bread. Every mile east was a mile farther from France, and a mile deeper into a winter that had not yet shown its teeth. In Berlin, a letter had already been signed that would decide everything. Under the Treaty of Potsdam of November 3, 1805, Prussia had pledged to join the coalition if Napoleon rejected its offered mediation, and Count Christian von Haugwitz had been sent to carry the terms. In the history that did not happen here, Haugwitz arrived to find Napoleon glittering with the triumph of Austerlitz, and his ultimatum quietly became a note of congratulation. But there was no triumph now. There was only a French army strung out across hostile country with nothing to show. Haugwitz delivered the Potsdam terms as written, a hard demand, not a courtier's bow. Frederick William III, the cautious king who had kept his large and well-drilled army neutral through every coalition appeal, finally saw the moment tilt. He ordered mobilization. The fence he had sat upon for 2 years had at last been knocked from under him, and Prussia's intact regiments began to move. Napoleon could not catch the Russians, and he could not feed an army on the march in December. So the Grande Armée went into winter cantonments scattered across Moravia and Galicia in a long, thin arc of billets. The consequences of this decision would prove catastrophic. The enemy that broke them was not Russian or Austrian. It was the cold, the bad water, and the lice. Typhus moved through the crowded quarters faster than any cavalry, and the men who did not sicken often simply walked away, drifting west in ones and twos toward a home that felt impossibly far. Berthier's returns told the story in shrinking columns of figures. An army that had numbered in the great host of summer was bleeding strength every week without a battle being fought. Francis I of Austria, still wearing the old crown of the Holy Roman Empire, used the same winter to gather what Napoleon was losing. And from the south, Austria's ablest soldier, Archduke Charles, marched his intact army north, unbroken, unbloodied, and angry. When the roads hardened in the spring of 1806, the coalition moved as one. This was the thing Napoleon had always prevented, and now could not, a concerted advance. Russian corps under Bagration and Buxhoden came west, with Bennigsen's gathered army behind them. Prussian columns crossed into Saxony and Bohemia. Archduke Charles brought the Austrian south up to join them. For the first time in the war, the Allied armies did not attack in isolation, one at a time, to be destroyed in detail, the very method by which Napoleon had won every campaign. They closed on the weakened French in concert. The Grande Armée that met them was a shadow of the instrument that had marched from Boulogne, its veteran ranks hollowed by a winter of disease. Napoleon still commanded it with genius, but genius cannot conjure soldiers who are dead of typhus, and it cannot be in three places at once. Napoleon did what he had never done before. He let go. The eastern conquests, Vienna, Moravia, the line of the Danube, were abandoned, and the Grande Armée turned its face toward Germany and France. The retreat was not a rout. Napoleon fought rearguard actions with the cold skill that had always been his, trading ground for time. But a retreating Napoleon was a new thing in Europe, and Europe noticed. The German princes of the Rhineland, who had bent to France because France seemed irresistible, began to calculate differently. A ruler who had attached his fortune to the emperor now watched that fortune walk backward across the map. Loyalties that had been bought by victory began, quietly, to waver. Each defection stripped another layer of the buffer that had shielded France's eastern frontier. The French Empire had been built on a single, unspoken promise that Napoleon did not lose. He had never been tested by a reverse on this scale, and neither had the throne he had raised only 2 years before. Now defeat abroad sharpened every grievance at home. The conscription that fed the wars, the British blockade that strangled trade, the long casualty lists, all of it had been bearable while the Eagles advanced. It was not bearable in retreat. Old Republicans, royalists who had only ever waited, and ambitious men inside Napoleon's own circle began to measure the distance between his authority and his army. France was tired. An empire that had seemed the natural order of things suddenly looked like one man's improvisation, and the man was no longer winning. And then came the question that would define everything that followed. What holds a conquered Europe together when the conqueror comes home beaten? The answer was, nothing held it together. With France pulled back behind the Rhine, the victorious powers divided the influence Napoleon had abandoned. There was no single new master of Central Europe, there were two. The Habsburgs in Vienna reached north and west to recover the standing they had lost at Ulm, drawing the southern German states back into an Austrian orbit. The Romanovs, who had won this war by the simple discipline of not fighting it on Napoleon's terms, extended Russian weight deep into Poland and the German north. Prussia, rewarded for its late commitment, enlarged itself between them. The Holy Roman Empire was not reborn, but neither was it replaced by a French design. Instead, a Germany of many states settled into the gap, pulled between competing Habsburg and Romanov spheres. The lasting irony belonged to the day it all turned. Napoleon had built his empire on the willingness of his enemies to come and be destroyed. He fell, in the end, because one man on a cold morning chose not to. History is not made only by the battles that are fought. Sometimes it is made by the heights that are left empty.